Okay, thank you, Hannah. It's quite a new concept that we're trying to kind of shape as we go along. Obviously, with your help, we try and make it very participatory and always want feedback from participants, and same ways from external experts that come and join us for the sessions, with the hope that we will end up with a strong and committed community that who are aligned with each other in the kind of fight to advocate for better water practices, and how that's translated in the media sphere. So it's about creating bridges and finding ways to expose water stories in the most constructive way. So this is what we're all about. But yeah, the quick agenda for today. We are going to, after the icebreaker that we've already had, we are going to have a very interesting input from Uwe Martin, who is our guest speaker today. And he will give a talk on slow violence, slow journalism, and slow hope. And I won't go into this because he will explain what these concepts mean, and how they can be applied to what we're trying to do. So I think that's the area that he is an expert in, but it's very applicable to what it is that we're trying to do with the community of practice. Then we will, so after Uwe has given his wonderful talk, we will leave a bit of room for some questions in an open discussion if you have any questions for Uwe. Then we will move on to spotlight introducing an opportunity for you journalists. And here Uwe will also support by giving you guys some tips and a bit of guidance in case you were interested to apply for this opportunity that I will introduce in a bit. So since he's got years and years and years of experience applying for different journalism opportunities, he is the most adequate person to give you the tips today. And so that's the one half of the session, and then we will move on to a very short brainstorming session to come up with ways of improving the community of practice. We really want to hear from you, what you think works, what you think doesn't work. We want you to be completely honest. This is a collaborative initiative, as I said earlier, so we really want to get rid of what doesn't work and bring in new, fresh ideas. And yeah, we've prepared a quick exercise for us to kind of continue shaping the community of practice. And yes, without further ado, I will quickly introduce you to, before I go on to that, we're a small team today. It's Hannah, who you all know very well, Hamza from CAS, hello Hamza, and myself. And we've got our wonderful guest speaker today, Uwe Martin, and he is basically everything under the name of journalism. He is a visual storyteller, slow journalist, researcher, educator. He's a full pack. And as you can tell from this wonderful portrait, he tells stories through very interactive, in a very interactive way, through different means and mediums, and always trying to do it in a very innovative way. And that's why we've brought him in today. He's got a lot of experience covering environmental issues, many of them that are related to water scarcity, and he has been part of many, co-founding many initiatives that he will go into when he introduces himself. But one that's more related to what we're all about is his latest initiative called the Earth Vision Lab, which tries to find solutions for the water, energy, food, climate nexus. So I'm sure he will talk about that, or you can ask him afterwards if you're more interested to know about it. And yes, with that, I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to spotlight you, Uwe, just to warn you.
Hello. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super happy for this opportunity to talk here. It's interesting that I don't know if I have seen one or two of you before. It's a last year. It's a water journalism conference, and so yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Let me share my presentation here that I did, and we start right here. And where is it here? Okay, so today I'd like to, so I'm, as Cora already said, like I'm a visual storyteller. I'm also kind of a slow journalist. I explain a little later what that means. Um, and together with my wife in a team, I have been collaborating to document the consequences of global agriculture since 2007. And um, so today I like to talk a little bit about the challenges of environmental stories, um, how I believe that a slow journalism approach can help us to report on these topics. And then also why I do believe that it's maybe not enough anymore to just provide the accurate information that we as journalists should be. Do you hear me? There's a extra voice.
Yes, that might be, if everyone can mute themselves so that we don't hear any echo, that would be
All right.
great. Apart from you, Uwe, obviously.
Okay, I try.
Yourself.
And so then, because I think like today at this point, with like all the crises like climate crisis and the crisis of species extinction and so on and so forth, I think we have to move beyond just reporting the facts, which is still super important. But I also think that in order to be constructive people of our society, we have to offer some hope to our readers because, and I don't mean activism. What I mean is really giving them both sides of a story, but showing them, also giving them hope. Because if we look at climate change just based on what's happening, it's pretty depressing and we probably will give up. So let me first start by looking into one project here real quick. I have been documenting water policy and water use in the American West over the since 2014, and that started with a story on the California drought that is a historic drought that was the largest drought in the last 1,200 years. And that was in 2014-15. Right now, we are in drought again. What was interesting when I was there is in the Central Valley of California, a lot of the food of the United States is produced there, especially nuts. 80, more than 80% of all the almonds in the world come from that area. And what was very interesting is that it's a basically completely human designed landscape, right? So like these large canals deliver water from the north of California, where a lot of rain falls, to the south and to the Central Valley. And they use it by this crazy constructions that like canals and pumping stations and so on and so forth. But this system is coming to see the end of it because it's not sustainable anymore. it brings all this water to agriculture. And if you're there in the middle of the drought, agriculture was still basically functioning normally. So it didn't show. And the only way you could show the drought was actually telling people story of like this woman here who lost her well, um, and so on and so forth. So it is always a challenge to show these kind of stories. And what is interesting in the region, back in 1883, John Wesley Powell, the guy who they named Lake Powell after, the big explorer of the American West, he said, "Gentlemen, you're piling up a heritage of conflict and litigation over water rights, for there is not sufficient water to supply the land." And that was back in 1883, when nobody knew anything about climate change and what else would happen. And he basically figured that in the whole Western United States, there could be maybe 1 or 2 million people living there. By now, just the Colorado River supplies about 40 million people, and obviously that leads to big problems. So I started to go down the Colorado River. Here's a picture of Lake Mead that is drying up. It's like the largest reservoir in the United States. Um, and I followed it all the way from the Rocky Mountains all the way down to the Delta, which is dry by now. And so what the problem is that even at the source of the Colorado River, um, there are all these canals that take out the water from there, and then down in the from the desert, through the desert they take the water, and so on and so forth. And so basically, it's too many straws in this one little tiny river, and everybody just takes it out. And so um, now, by now, it's basically wait, what happens here? Going on. By now, the delta in Mexico lays completely dry, and no water reaches the delta anymore. And that destroyed one of the largest ecosystems in the United States and just turned it into a big desert. This is an area that had lagoons and that had like crocodiles and whatever. I mean, all sorts of things. And now it looks like this. And so then the third part of the story um, in 2015 was looking at the Salton Sea, which is the largest lake in California, and it's drying up after um, after rural to urban water transfers took a lot away a lot of the water that is feeding the lake. The lake is fed by the tile and tailwater of farms. So from agriculture, the water then flows into the lake, creating a lot of problems with pesticides, so on and so forth. But without that water, the lake in the middle of the desert, where it's one of the hottest places in the United States. It's about 50 degrees there right now. And so without that water, it creates like this regional dust bowl leading to asthma through like small particle matter and so on and so forth. And so it's basically one of the largest environmental disasters in the United States. And so like that's a background that I have been documenting since 2014, 15 in that area. And I'm continuing this work because it keeps going on, keeps going worse and worse and worse with climate change. And so when we talk, I don't know if you have heard of Rob Nixon and the book Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor. I think is one of the most interesting. Um, wait, where am I? Whoop, whoop. Okay, it's one of the most interesting books that's out there because very often we consider violence something that people do to people. But if you destroy the seed serenity of people, like Monsanto is doing, for example, in India, or if you take away the water from people, let's say like by dams that Turkey is building, taking away the water from like other countries downstream, and so on and so forth. If you or like taking away land from people who have traditionally used it to build commercial farms, then suddenly you create slow charging violence that in the end will take more people's lives than most wars does. And it leads to wars and displacement and all those social conflicts that are started by that. Well, so the challenge of that is that because those disasters are slow moving, it's very difficult to put them into media that are always interested in news, right? As journalists, we are always interested in like, oh, what's new, right? Do you want to tell a story about the California drought or something like that about what's new? Nothing, basically, because it is something that has been developing for the last 30 years and will develop over the next 50 years. So the question is, um, if we have those slow moving crises like climate change, species extinction, desertification, water depletion, and silent killers like drought, water poisoning, air pollution, how to report it? Because they are too big to understand in one article, right? I mean, it's nearly impossible. So our approach to that, like my wife and I, we have been trying that to tackle that with a kind of slow journalism approach. And what we understand by that is that we stay very long on the ground, report really deeply, so that one story we can not only publish as a magazine story, but also in many different other forms. And we become kind of experts to the region and to the particular story. So we published this story, for example, that was on cotton, global cotton all around the world, in not just in magazines such as Geo, but we also did 10 short web documentaries, like linear movies with it. Hey, wait, why isn't that moving? Sorry, don't know what happens here. Anyway, and then we also publish in many different magazines, such as, like this is a story on the Salton Sea. But we also publish in iPad apps that bring together film, photography, sound, text, uh, graphics, and so on and so forth. And so by doing this, or in our own app, by doing this, we are able to reach more readers. We can reach readers in a short magazine or newspaper piece that takes about 10 or 15 minutes to read. Then the app would maybe take half an hour to read. But then we also go on showing people, showing our work in exhibition spaces where you have multiple screens and the viewers or the visitors become kind of like reporters through these landscapes that we give them. And then on the screens, you can explore many different expert interviews. And by expert, I don't mean people sitting in universities, but I also mean farmer and fisherwomen and indigenous people and so on and so forth, because very often they know their land much better than somebody sitting in a university, right? And I think it's important. And so by doing this, you have like this fractured narrative that the public is building themselves. So we give them back more control rather than just like telling a linear story where we take them by the hand, which we do when we write an article or do a radio piece or do a movie, right? And so the other thing we did with it is, together with these exhibitions, we just published an analog digital book that brings in a kind of like cinematic flow of images, but at the same time, the quotes from different shareholders that we have met all over the world. And when I say it's an analog digital book, so it's a book that you can keep in your hand and like move through it. But at the end of the book, it opens up, like here, it opens up an archive of 57 films, 57 short films, interviews, and so on and so forth. So when you buy the book, you can then dive deep into all those different stories from all over the world. And you can spend like 12 or 15 or 20 hours to just like go and really see and really dive deep into it. And the other thing is, because of that, that opens this approach that has so many layers. It opens up many different meanings and new collaborations. Like in this project that we started, it's called World of Matter. It's an international art and research project where suddenly all the discussion not only goes to readers, but also to universities. And but then the question is like let's meet one guy and let him say something, and then I continue. So this is Pekwa, an indigenous person I interviewed in Brazil.
O homem, dia, vai lutar contra o próprio semelhante dele. Ele não vai querer mais o petróleo. Ele não vai querer mais o ouro. Eles vão se matar, mentir, trair. É isso aqui, a água doce.
So the question is it enough to still just report those stories, right? Is it enough to only show the consequences? And I believe that more and more our readers are looking for solutions also, like for showing not only what is bad, but also offering some stories that tell what has already been done. And there's an article by the Rachel Carson Center, by the director of the Rachel Carson Center, called Slow Hope. And I think by showing those stories that actually tell hopeful things, that's a great thing that we as journalists can do. But I also think that we can even go further than just being more constructive and showing those stories that offer solutions. Because as journalists, what we very often do is we talk to everybody, right? Many people that we speak to never meet in real life, especially when you come to places like agriculture that is very contested, where like the environmentalists don't talk to the farmers, and the farmers hate the politicians, and the politicians don't trust the scientists, and so on and so forth. But we talk to everybody. We talk to the farmers, to the scientists, to the activists, to the politicians, and to the guy at the bar, right? And a lot of them do have ideas for solutions. They just don't have them, they just don't have a forum to bring them on. Because if you're going to a village, a woman or a farmer in a village very often is not at a water conference, right? But if we see them as experts, and then instead of just drawing them together in a virtual way by writing a story or editing a movie, right? That's when we bring those positions together. But instead, what would happen if instead of just connecting them virtually, we would actually bring them to one table, right? If we would bring all those experts, farmers, fisherwomen, activists, and so on, to one table and see if we can find solutions together. Because we as journalists very often have this global perspective that a lot of the people who are inside of the story are missing, because they are moving in their own thing. And so if we are connecting those expert teams, I want to show you like a little sneak peek into what we are doing right now. This is my house. I bought that at the Salton Sea. It was totally run down, and I started renovating it. I built a theater in there, and I bought the house because I will be documenting what's going on at the Salton Sea, this environmental destruction and so on and so forth, for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And now, because I became part of the community there and met so many people over the reporting, I started bringing together those experts, engineers, people working in saltwater agriculture, the local community, scientists, and so on and so forth. And we are building something called the Salton Sea Sustainable Salt Community. And that one will desalinate water with the energy of the sun and use that water to cool the place and give drinking water to people, but also we will use a saltwater agricultural system that will produce food within the desert. So using salt water in the desert, you can actually create a completely sustainable community for a heating world. And yeah, that's something I wanted to leave you with. I hope, and I'm very excited to hear your questions and discuss with you where we could go as journalists. And of course, the question, are we still journalists or suddenly we become activists? So that might be an interesting question to follow up on this. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Uwe. That was fascinating. And I love how you take us on this journey, audiovisual journey. And yeah, I encourage anyone who is in Luxembourg, is that right? Is that where the exhibition is?
Yes, that's
To go
going
and
on till
visit
the end of August.
to the end of August. So if you happen to go there, go and see Uwe's exhibition. And yes, maybe now we can have an open discussion. And I'm sure our participants have some questions for you in terms of what you've said about, how do we become, I guess, agents of change as well, whilst being journalists and reporters. Where do you find the balance? And maybe participants, you can talk about your experience as communication experts, what you struggle with, what you've discovered, etc. So maybe Malak, I see you nodding away. Maybe you can tell us a bit about where you stand in this line.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really interesting to see what you have been tackling on environmental issues. And I agree, usually when journalists report issues related to the environment, we always look at the downside of it and how bad the situation is, but we usually tend to forget what's really being done to solve the problem or the issue. So maybe my question here, because I think it's a bit critical, how to still find hope when there isn't that much of hope. I mean, sometimes there would be an environmental issue that is happening somewhere. And if I'm talking about the MENA region, maybe in one country there will be a problem within a specific country related to agriculture or water, but there isn't anything done to solve the issue. So reporters, or let's say journalists, would want to highlight this environmental issue and maybe suggest recommendations, but like, hope is still not there. So how to really find hope when the story is very critical?
I think that's what we all struggle with, right? And there are just stories where I personally can't see hope because very often I'm too far away. One big example of that is when I reported farmer suicides in India, where official numbers say more than 300,000 farmers committed suicide, but unofficial numbers are more in the million. And I didn't see any hope in that story because it's just a desolate situation. It's too many people in there that are farming, and everything that they try to get better moves other people out of farming, right? Because if you put a tractor there, then suddenly less people are needed. And so I think that in that case, it totally depends how connected you can be as a journalist and how close you can get to the people themselves. And that's why what I'm more and more think is that because I'm an outsider, sometimes I can create the dialogues between them. And I personally think that if we don't ask often, and just by starting to ask the people who are actually involved, asking like, hey, what would help you? What do you have for kind of ideas that might be changing the situation. And very often people in those regions are not very mobile, I found, especially in disadvantaged areas or countries. So they are probably not able to see what is happening 50 kilometers from them, right? And so I think one role of actually local journalists could be bringing those news to those people, and not only what a big problem I think is that we very often bring the news to the elites in the cities, and that's our audience. But what would happen if you would connect those villages in for example, rural India, by becoming a kind of, like, I think in is it called Hakawati, the old in Arabian countries, that the storytellers that move from place to place, I think it's called Hakawati, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then tell those local stories to other people and bring them the news. So maybe we don't find a solution in this one village, but 5 villages over, behind the mountains that the local people don't reach, there might be a story. And by going over and telling those stories in a local community, you might be able to actually find that. And then, but then the question is, are you still a journalist or not, right? If you just tell the story and then bring those people together, providing that is, maybe it's journalism, maybe it's something else, I don't know. I mean, does that make sense, or does that answer the question? Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, think you have, of course, I don't have answers to that, right? I can just like throw out some things that come to mind. If I would have answers, I would be earning $1 million, and and everybody would be happy. So yeah.
Wow, fascinating. And I mean, I think this discussion could just continue and has to continue beyond this phase. Obviously, now we're just starting to get into this. But I know Gul has her hand raised. I'm not sure if you still have a question of it, or
actually I heard quite a bit from Uwe already that maybe my question is a bit ridiculous, but I want to connect to another dimension that I myself have a dual position. I'm assistant professor at the university, teaching, doing research on water, climate, energy issues, and I'm also editor of an online platform. And so I'm doing this since 5 years. I'm relatively new, I should say, to journalism and communication of water, environmental, climate issues. I mean, we focus on the Middle East and North Africa, and it's as Malak already said, it's a particularly challenging region regarding awareness, regarding political constraints. My question would be about whether scientists, I'm putting it in the quote of like universities, mostly academic institutions, that also have a role in both creating this scientific knowledge, but also educating sort of professionals of the future. And whether we are talking about water engineers, whether it's about people that look at policy or geoscience approaches to water. In your experience, do you see enough interaction between different disciplines in the water or climate sciences and journalists in terms of creating this opportunity or the platform to make it more accessible, the water problems, the water solutions, the need for hope, or is it a big challenge? And do you see barriers? And if you have another hour, maybe do you see differences in countries? Because I mean, the example you gave in the US in terms of a lake drying up because of water diversion, we have the Aral Sea in Central Asia, we have the Urmia Lake in Iran. I mean, and there are different political contexts, but problem is almost exactly the same, that there is not enough water for the thirsty farming or cities.
Yeah, it's like that. That's the interesting part of having this global perspective, right? Because you can connect things that from the Aral Sea and the water in the American West because of that suddenly as a journalist. So I want to answer this in two or three ways. One is, what is the hope for journalists to build a sustainable future for themselves, like a sustainable business practice? And if you have this global perspective on things, suddenly you become an expert yourself as a journalist in really diving deep into that. And that then opens up doors to, for example, talk at academic institutions, getting paid for conferences and so on and so forth, which really is often much better paid than writing an article for a magazine. And so if you can bring in, if you have reported on one of those stories, for example, the Aral Sea, then Lake Oromia or the Salton Sea, if you do a second story on that, suddenly you can create a larger project that then is better to publish to many different outlets and adds more value because you bring in this global perspective. So that's on the journalism side. The other part of the question, it's what I really grapple with, because I see that we have in working in between journalism and art and a little bit of science, I see that each of the areas offers a lot of quality research, but they have very different forms of communicating. So journalists are really good in reaching many people and being kind of translators between the professionals and the experts and the lay person who doesn't know shit about whatever topic, right? But this building bridges and this translation between those is super, super important. Often what is lacking in journalism is the complexity of a topic and the multiple layers, because we are just telling like one story, right? To make it translatable, very often we make it easy to understand. And so what I found is that the discussions in the art world are much, much more complex and go much deeper, and as well as, of course, in science. But the problem very often is that the language used within those spaces is very insular and very exclusive. So in order to raise in the academic field, you have to use highfalutin words and very special terms that your colleagues think you are super intelligent and super bright, but then nobody else understands. Nobody from the outside knows. I mean, if you talk about the Anthropocene or hyper objects, right, especially if you come from the humanities, then those terms take down a lot of time, right? Because you can communicate much more efficient within your bubble, but outside of the bubble, you're lost. And so my dream would actually be, and I think it's done in the United States at some universities that are doing a pretty good job. I don't know about the MENA region for that. Is if we could start or extend programs that bring together journalists and art and hard science like environmental science, and have people study that together and build teams from the beginning on. I think that is a way to go in the future. Because I believe that it's impossible for one person to report on those large topics and even understand them, right? I mean, it took me like a few years to get a little bit of understanding into genetic engineering, because I'm just not a genetist, right? I'm not. So, and most journalists who don't come from a scientific background don't know how to read a study or how to use data journalism or anything at all. And so I think that is really what we need to invest in. I don't think it's done enough. I know there are hopeful initiatives towards that. Yeah, but I think it can be extended. Is that what's your experience there?
Yeah, actually, I should say I have been working, as I said, just 5 years with journalists from the MENA region mostly, but also I find it, yeah, maybe similar to what you are describing, these different languages. For instance, on Fanak Water, our media platform, we publish long country files that are really in-depth research. We publish short opinion pieces. We publish interviews. So we work with journalists, we work with researchers, we sometimes interview a politician. And like you say, the languages are so different.
Mm.
It becomes an additional challenge. We often have to work with people who are good journalists but don't have a water background, or scientists who are too technical that end up writing these jargon-full reports. It's a challenge, and maybe it needs another generation to have these people studying in teams, having a different approach to education about environmental issues. I mean, not specific for water. But also in our university, we have a special bachelor program that does this. It's called Atlas, and students take courses from many different faculties. So they don't do only humanities or social sciences or technical, but they are expected to take their courses from different faculties. I mean, I'm at a technical university. Unfortunately, we don't have media studies, but at least the communication science. But I think it's essential to have these common language. I don't know, it doesn't have to be a new language, but at least somehow jargon-free, understandable, and accessible for lay experts, as you are describing, for farmers, for water users that don't know nothing about technical aspects or the deep science of this climate change or water. I think I will continue with this for hours, but it's fascinating. You can manage to work with artists, with scientists, and produce something common, whether it's a photo story or I would love to continue this conversation.
Yes,
not take up the time of others for today.
No, please, let's do. I mean, I have time, so and I take time to do this, and that would be super fascinating. One other thing, just to mention that, just when you were talking, flipped to my mind. Another challenge of this collaboration is that as journalists or as a photographer, I depend on keeping my copyright to my material. And so when I worked with people from academia, very often they want it to be commons, which I totally appreciate and which I think it should be. But so as an academic, people raise through publishing, and then you raise and get better jobs and so on and so forth. And then you get paid by the system. As a journalist, that's not true. As a journalist, I have to keep my rights to my things. And so that was always a conflict, for example, in the World of Matter projects, where all the professors, they wanted to have like everything for everybody and that they can play with it and so on and so forth. And I, as a journalist, said like, well, sorry, I'm not getting paid $60,000 a year. I have to like try to sell all this stuff by myself. And so that is like the economic. So there's not only a language problem, but also an economic systems problem to doing that.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and so I hope I think there will be ways in overcoming this, in that maybe foundations could take in helping the research of people to get together and get everybody get paid a fair amount. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to step in as well, because I think it's also very relevant to what we're trying to do here with the CoP initiative, and kind of finding this common language and kind of trying to identify common struggles the German environmental / water journalists are having, and how can you survive in that industry, like you were talking about, whilst doing a good job, because if you're not going to get paid, you're not going to continue. Unfortunately, it can't all be open source, and that maybe brings me to discussing maybe just generally a bit what you think this platform could be best used for. And I mean, we could take on this discussion and continue having using it as a place where we journalists exchange ideas, exchange struggles, and find kind of support. But maybe we could, Uwe, if you don't mind us jumping to this short discussion, and then we can introduce the opportunity for journalists at the end. Yeah, so I think because it just takes, it links in well from what you've just been discussing. And if I just send I'll send you a link to a mural page I've prepared. And if you could all go on this mural, I'll also share my screen so that you can see what's happening. Basically, we've started this, as you know, back in December. And it's been very up and down. I mean, we know that all the sessions have been incredibly interesting, but in terms of the commitment from participants, in terms of the consistency, that's been harder to kind of find a solution for, find the right balance for. And we know there is a way. It's just kind of finding the magic formula, finding the way that we can create this platform, this space where we can work together to for the future of environmental reporting, more generally speaking. And it would be a shame to not use what we've started, because we know there's a lot of potential, but we kind of need your ideas and your feedback as to what do you think would be most useful for journalists. I'm not a journalist, so I can't say, but here we've basically put four different formats that we envision, and maybe if you can read through these, I'll go through them as well, but if you can get just a post-it, round post-it, and maybe just put it wherever you think the format would be, for whatever format you think would be the most useful. So the first one, do we want to use this space as just an opportunity to share updates, even like articles that you've been writing, and also opportunities, which we do already. We already share opportunities, and just generally network? Or do you want something, or do you think it would be better to use this a more solutions oriented platform, space where we can really kind of work together to try and find ways to, like you were talking earlier, about the lack of interaction potentially between the academic world and the media industry. So would it be a good idea to, like you see in option 2, to use it as a way to kind of brainstorm and find those links, and even test different ideas, or do you think that there's a lack of knowledge that environmental journalists have? Do you think, especially obviously focusing on the water sector, would you as journalists prefer to gain more knowledge about the water sector? Because you're already professional journalists, so really, you don't, you might value spending the time on actually learning about what you'll then potentially have to write about. Or alternatively, like someone's put their dot here, yeah, find ways to reframe water, and which I guess is what maybe we've done in this session, finding how do we approach it, according to Uwe, that we it's a slow hope approach, so that's very interesting. But I'm sure there are loads of ways of approaching it. It's about sharing and seeing what works for each of you as journalists. If you can't access it, yeah, maybe you can tell me. Someone put their dot in number 4. I don't know who that was, but
I did.
Malak, do you want to expand on that? What, how do you think we, as a space, we could create that?
Okay, so for that, I think it would be interesting if the space can like have maybe sessions on developing reporting skills, especially when we talk about water stories, because I think maybe there's some systematic way on how water is being reported, but if journalists can get introduced to new forms and new ways, I think it would be more effective, and it will have a direct impact on how stories are being reported, and it can improve, the journalist style. So maybe having different experts who use different approaches, so someone can actually like expand their understanding and skills of how water is being reported, and how we can shift from the typical way it's being reported.
So how can we move away from the narrative that hasn't worked, basically? How can we?
Exactly, yeah, if we can like if we can see or discover new ways of reporting water, and how we can like have a bigger space for journalists to share other ways and methods, and it would be more of exchanging even expertise and developing skills when it comes to reporting. I think this is from my perspective.
No, that does make a lot of sense. And maybe Gul, do you, since you were talking about FNAC earlier and about kind of finding a common language, is this something that you think would be also useful for journalists, for water journalists, or journalists wanting to go into water reporting?
Yeah, actually, as I said, okay, maybe in other platforms it works better, but we often have difficulties when a journalist that knows something about water wants to write a water article. So what Malek is suggesting, I think, is very useful. But also in that sense, number 3 maybe is also relevant. Maybe it doesn't specifically focus on water, but in general, how to be a better, informed and responsible reporter. But maybe like Uwe was talking about, where to find data, how to interpret data, how to read scientific papers without spending days, I mean, these kind of maybe trainings or sharing of experiences on how different people work from the science, from the journalism angles. It will be very, very relevant also for us, I think, to see different approaches, what works, what not.
Yeah. No, and there's a nice overlap between these two different ways of approaching the sessions, and I think we can find like a nice common ground. And we're even envisioning maybe having a kind of a resource platform where, as we go along with the meetings, participants can access all the knowledge we gather up. So we've had sessions on menstrual health, for example, and how water is linked to that. Also, I've had sessions in terms of accountability in the water sector, and those are all experts in that field who've come in and have, poured out this knowledge, but then finding a way to putting all that knowledge, making it accessible for journalists who then need to or want to write about it. So that's definitely something that we could look into, and amazing. And in terms of the actual format of the session, do you value more a fixed agenda, or do you think it's more valuable to, if we led the conversation today with Uwe that you were having, which was very interesting, and in a way sometimes it feels a bit unnatural to interrupt this because you have to stick to an agenda. As it's a very collaborative, participatory thing we're trying to do here, do you think it works better for you to have it semi-fixed, so just let it flow according to what discussions are happening, or have you preferred do you prefer trying to fit in a lot of different things, because sometimes it might feel like it's less valuable doing it that way? Any visiting sheep? But I guess we can just see how this evolves, and
I think semi-fixed works nice also to give some opportunity to discuss things that come up, because we are not meeting each other regularly. One thing that I also would appreciate is maybe I don't know the overview, how many people are involved in this community of practice. Maybe it's tens of people, maybe, I don't know, maybe 50, but
it's not tens, it's not loads, it's quite small, but yes, obviously, as you can see today, unfortunately, sometimes we have less people.
But there are maybe periods that people are not that available, like it's almost mid-July, maybe people are enjoying their summer holidays. But what I wanted to ask, or maybe explore, is okay, it's too small group to discuss that, but to have smaller groups meeting maybe more often on a side project that are interested in a certain issue, like accountability in the water sector, or I don't know, water pollution, or droughts, maybe thematic focus, and then they only discuss that in a separate meeting. Is it possible to do this, or is it too much given the size?
I mean, it's definitely something we can discuss, and it would definitely make it, it seems like it's a more practical way of using this space, rather than, touching on different topics and then moving on. So kind of like following up on topics that people are interested in and want to explore further. But Hannah has her hand up, I think.
Yes, I'm sorry, I hope you can hear me, because my very poor. Is it working?
It's not working great, but maybe if you message.
Maybe switch off the video.
Yeah, switch off the video. Thanks.
No?
Yeah, maybe that's better.
Hello, hello.
Yes. Hello?
1 second. Is it better?
Yeah, we can
Okay.
hear you.
No, I actually really like that idea because, you know, we've noticed that, okay. No, I really like the idea of the smaller groups because, you know, we had different people attend different sessions, and it shows that, you know, for whatever reason, of course, you know, this COP has around like, you know, like 20-ish members that we interact with regularly. And then there's a few people that come in and out, sort of, right? So, and of course, there are some topics that are more interesting to certain people, right? So I do quite like the idea of clustering it up into groups of interest, and then nominating perhaps a group leader who doesn't have to be of, you know, the CWAS team or the CAS team, right? But it could also be one of you guys, or, you know, one of the other members, who can then sort of take the lead with, of course, our support and, you know, like with our inputs to shape smaller working groups that can either then, for example, jointly work on tangible projects that they can hand in for funding, or entries or articles for publication, but then basically tackle, you know, for example, A, like a working group on menstrual hygiene and all of that, and then B, perhaps one on topics such as the ones that we discussed today. So would that be something that would work? Because, you know, we always ask for your input, and we're very keen to have your input, and then, you know, one person nominates a topic that they're interested in, and we're like, okay, this sounds cool, then we structure a session around it, and then it's interesting to perhaps only a handful of people, right? So I do like this approach, and I think we're like, we should really continue discussing this and seeing whether that could be something that would work for this group of people.
Maybe also building with that, how open is CEVAS or CAS or other partners of, I don't know the institutional background, but to campaign for new members or for the practice, community of practice, or is it sort of fixed?
No, absolutely. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Hannah, but we definitely we want to target people that are more committed, because we know that it's a very new project that we've started. You know, the initial people that were invited have now, maybe some of them moved on from whatever you know, from the topic, or might not feel as committed as they were at the beginning, or so we definitely need to reevaluate who is part of the COP. Do we want to make it open? Do we want to make it open to whoever is interested in the topic, or do we want to work with the same journalists to kind of build that close-knit community? Obviously, the problem with that is that the smaller the community is, unless we invest enough in keeping people active and motivated, we end up in situations where maybe we only, like, you know, like in the last few sessions, we only have a few participants, which is, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's, you know, you change one person and that person will change another 2 or 3 or 4. So it's still very useful, but obviously the impact, it would be better if we had more committed people. So yes, I think we need to find a way to bring in, invite people that will add, will add commitment to the community.
I mean, if we are talking about Middle East, I'm sorry, Anna. Oh, no raise hands. I'm just jumping. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if we are still focusing on Middle East and North Africa, it could even be interesting to look at any countries underrepresented. I haven't heard anyone from Turkey, for instance. And I mean, in general, I see Turkey as being quite, under-researched, underrepresented anyway. But also Iran, I mean, countries that you would expect more, maybe not journalists per se, but communication people or people from NGOs that are interested in having these stories out or doing a project and trying to find a good way to communicate it and reach out to communities or politicians or whatever. That's why I was asking, could there be more people in different countries that could join, and also to see the context, political or otherwise, in other countries, how journalism or communication works in terms of water issues. That's
yeah, something. I mean, that's something we'd have to discuss internally, and but we yeah, definitely need to see what countries we're targeting, and that what you've just said makes sense. It would make sense to kind of expand and involve more countries.
Or can I jump in quickly?
Yeah.
I really like that, and I love those suggestions, and you know, I see people popping in and out, you know, so like there's definitely I think there's an interest in continuing this community of practice, and I think what could be useful, just to make sure we don't take up too much of your time right now, and we also still have Uwe in here with us, and want some more things from him today. So maybe for those of you who are interested, like for example, feels like, you know, you have some great ideas. You know, this CoP is also supposed to be for you in a sense, right? So I think if we can. Oh, stop. Sorry. Oh, I'm just losing my connection. Give me 1 second. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yes, so if we can follow up perhaps on this and do a working group that is a bit more practical, where we could explore, you know, some more insights, that might be great. I'm so sorry. My connection is. I don't know if you can hear me. I hear myself like.
No,
can you come back?
Definitely.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll come back. But yeah, I think maybe I'll just continue for you, Hannah. But yeah, I think what Hannah was trying to say obviously is that the interest is there. We need to continue it. We just need to kind of reevaluate how we approach this community of practice. So yeah, thank you so much for the input, and we will get back to, you know, we will come back to you with fresh ideas, and definitely reevaluate who is part of this CoP, and identify more people that would benefit from it. Definitely, yes. Great. So then, just to finish off, we want to leave you with a couple of opportunities. You've got the link to the mural that I sent you, so you can access that whenever you want. But basically, these are some opportunities that we have identified that you might be interested in. The one that has quite a soon deadline, yes, it's on the 15th of July, is the Constructive Journalism Fellowship, and this is offered by the Constructive Journalism Lab from DW Academy, and it offers a 4-month fellowship to TV, multimedia, video journalists, photographers, all types of journalists from the MENA region in Africa. The deadline, like I said, is the 15th of July, and the application form is quite straightforward. So if it is something that you would be interested in, maybe Uwe, if you have a few tips in terms of if the participants were interested in applying for the fellowship, if you have any tips in terms of how to present themselves, how to, you know, pitch their water stories, because I know that you have to write why you would be interested in the fellowship. So here, I guess that's a critical part, where you're basically selling yourself as a journalist. So is there anything you could tell the participants that might help them if they were interested in applying, considering they only have a few days before deadline?
I think first of all you need to have a good story, right? Like why you're applying there. Sorry, I haven't been looking into this opportunity, so I don't know what specifically they asked for
Mhm.
in those stories.
Um,
In general, what I see in most of it is that a jury who doesn't know you has to always have a picture in their mind right away with basically your first three sentences. So they have to understand that that's how I try to write my proposals, so that right in the first paragraph you can see images, you can see questions, um, that are relevant. And what always helps is if you are able to connect a specific story to a larger thing that even a jury somewhere in another country can relate to. If that's possible, then that helps. And what I always do is, and and it helps when you do it with partners. I'm terrible to do it myself for my own projects, but I'm pretty good in helping people uh, with their projects. So, for example, let's say you have a story about um, arsenic pollution in Morocco, in a rural area or whatever, um, and so then the question would be, what the story is really about. And one thing is, if you write it down in three sentences and one paragraph, that's like the normal pitch that we always do as journalists, and that's easy, right? I mean, it's not easy, it's like super complicated, but it's like what we are used to do as journalists. But what I think is a helpful exercise to connect it to a larger issue is very often then, after writing the specific story down in three sentences, then write it down again, but use only 6 words and use a partner for that. Use only 6 words that are not one sentence, but that are basically like stacking the frame around them. So, for example, in this case, which I just made out of my mind, it would be, I don't know, arsenic, poison wells. It would be probably mostly females are poisoned by that, and then it's like a rural community, and it's I don't know, transportation because it's difficult to get other water there. Whatever, just like making something up. Well, the problem is now that is very, very specific to that one story, and it's very general at the same time, those 6 words, right? What then I do is like I put those 6 words to the side and tell them to the partner, and then force a partner to let me tell the same story again, but now in only 3 words. But you're not allowed to use any of the 6 words again. So what is really the story about? But use only 3 words. And then after we do that very often, what happens is that the terms become much more general and more relatable to other stories. And then you throw away those 9 words that you already have and just find one word. And very often this one word is something that connects down to a deep human level that we are all connected to in a way. And so if you find this like general thread through a story, that is basically like what turns a regional story into an international relevant piece. It's difficult to understand it now that it's so abstract, but one example that might tell that is, so the one group in a JONA, so from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation journalism class, they did a story on a guy who is developing like electric bicycles to transport stuff, and he hates cars and everything. And so it could have been this like typical like activist story, you know, like guy who loves cycling, who hates cars, and so on and so forth. But the deeper story that they discovered was that this guy, when he was a little boy, like 4, 5, 6 years old, his best friend, a girl, had to move with her family because a coal company like dig away their village, right, to get to coal, and or their town, and so he had this big fear, and so the group, after coming up with like all those generic terms, suddenly the last word they had was fear. And because that's a deep story from this one character, is about this fear of environmental destruction that destroyed his own family and his friendship and so on and so forth. And so now, when we now start reporting a story about fear, suddenly you can find a completely different approach of having this guy like cycling through this fearful city of like monstrous cars and stuff like that, right? So it helps you tell a story in a way that I can relate to, and it helps you shape your focus to it. And because fear, we all know what fear feels like, right? And so that is that's one tip I can give for proposals that often helps if we can connect it to a larger story. That, let's say you're reporting a story from Morocco, but you have an international jury, and in case of Deutsche Welle, you have people sitting in an office somewhere in Bonn or Berlin. So how can they relate to that with being very specific why it matters to the people on the ground, but at the same time why it matters to me sitting in an office in Hamburg? I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm happy to hear.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely makes sense to me, and it's very applicable. I mean, the for the fellowship, the pitch, the thing you have to, the story you have to propose has to be related in some way to COVID. So you don't get more relatable than that. But I guess within that, within COVID, what elements, like what, how can you connect even more? Because it's different things that it means. It's meant different things for different people.
I mean, that's a very good example. What did it mean for you? Like, if you come up with one term, like what changed with COVID for each of you?
I'm sure it'll be very different ones, but
Mariam, what did change? What has been changing for you with COVID?
In Tunisia?
No, for you personally.
For you personally, what does COVID mean?
A lot of things. I'm really personally, I'm a little bit of disappointed and depressed because it's now in Tunisia it's chaos. It's there is a lack of vaccines, and the situation is not good, and there is a lockdown everywhere. We can't move. We can't. Today I came especially for this CoP, but I can't go out from my house. I'm at the office now. It become difficult for us journalists to get to get information, to work, and we are no more motivated to do anything.
So motivation or lack of motivation is actually like this motivation could be a term, right? That we all grapple with, right?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go. What is it for you? Like when you think about COVID, maybe it's completely different, right?
For me, as a person or as a journalist?
Whatever you can take it wherever you want. It's your.
It's for a journalist. It makes our career upside down. We have dreams. We have ambitions. But everything is changing. And maybe we are lucky to be in a better situation than other people, other common people in other areas, rural areas. And it's summer, and this subject of water is in Tunisia. Every summer we have problems of water and water cuts, and there is agglomerations and communities with living without water. So it's we should go on and write stories about water, but we are chained, yeah, and chain. So we are looking for solutions, and maybe tomorrow will be better. I don't know.
But I think, Miriam, what you're saying about lack of motivation, getting to the point where, as you know, as a person, but also as a journalist, that
Yeah,
you get to a point where there's a lack of motivation. That's something that has, you know, reverberated around the world. That a lot of people are finding themselves in this situation. But just to kind of go back to your point, Uwe, I think it's so interesting because, you know, what does COVID mean to every person? I've read a lot of stuff, a lot of articles over the last year where they framed COVID as an opportunity. You know, oh, find the opportunity within COVID. Yes, okay, so that it might mean opportunity for some people, but it definitely won't mean opportunity for, it'll be lack of opportunities for others. So in terms of you, if you are interested in applying to this fellowship, and when you do have to write the proposal, maybe I think that's what you've talked about, Uwe. That's an exercise that that would be very useful for framing your story. And yes, I think we've really gone over time, and I don't want to keep Uwe for much longer.
I'm fine if you guys are. So don't worry about me. I signed up for this, so I'm here.
But it has been, I mean, it's been only a few of us, but I think it's been very interesting and very useful nonetheless. Hello?
No, excuse me. I am speaking with my daughter.
Oh, right, okay. Thanks for joining. And we have recorded the session, so Nedra, I'll send you the session so you can rewatch the beginning, because I know you missed that.
Cora, maybe we're not fluently English speakers in Tunisia. I use it to write in French and Arabic, but I have some suggestions. Maybe I will send them to find a platform that is useful for us journalists, and where we can find materials to write a lot more stories about it.
And then if you feel more comfortable, definitely writing in another language, as long as it's Arabic or French or English or German. Definitely.
I write English, but we're not speaking.
You can speak it wonderfully, but I know what you mean, that sometimes if you need to like express yourself, it's always 10 times easier in your own language. Yes, it would be wonderful to stay in touch. Are you all part of the WhatsApp group?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So obviously through there, Miriam, we can stay in touch, and we will continue this discussion. And yeah, definitely find ways of supporting each other as journalists. I'm classing myself as a journalist, I'm not. But we're here to facilitate that in some way or another.
No, we need you as journalists. We need scientists, we need NGOs, we need and thank you for this opportunity to meet journalists. Like I make my research on the I forget his
Uwe?
Yeah.
Uwe.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's very interesting to read about it and to see the photographies, and it's good to learn about.
It's inspiring.
blessings. Yeah,
It really
yes.
is. And Uwe, I will send your contacts in a follow-up email to the participants, and then anything else, your website and anything else for them to follow your work. And I'm sure they'll be very interested.
And let me
Excuse
know
me.
if you have ideas and stories and stuff like that. I might not be able to answer all the time, or at least I will answer, but it might be sometimes that I'm like, yeah, we all know that. But yeah, if you have ideas.